Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Today we're going to cover some Revolutionary War battles. So what we have to remember is during the 1770s, we had our Continental Congress who were trying to figure out what to do with these British taxes and how to deal with the monarchy in England. What were we to do as colonists who wanted to have our own government? So the king sends army over, we go to war. Right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to cover a couple of the battles. We're not going to cover all the battles. We'll talk about some people. We'll talk about some events, first battle, last battle, stuff like that. All right, so the first one we're going to get into happened in April of 1775, and this is going to be the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, the battles of Lexington and Concord were the first battles of the Revolutionary War. Lexington and Concord were a series of battles that today we combine as one historical event. Now, the battles of Lexington began to take place on the night of April 19, 1775. The battles were fought between British loyalists and angry patriot militias. This tension between the British colonists and the patriots of the 13 colonies is a factor that caused a vast acceleration of the war. On the first night of the American Revolutionary War, about 700 British troops were marching onto Concord to attack and seize the arms factory. Now, this arms factory was where the Patriot forces or the militia kept their firearms. On the way in Lexington, the British soldiers encountered roughly 70 militiamen, and after a brief gunfight, the Patriot militia retreated and the British continued on to Concord. Now, Paul Revere was responsible for alerting the American militia of the imminent attack by the British. Revere belonged to a group of patriots who were responsible for the Boston Tea Party named the Sons of Liberty. There was a church that was to alert Revere by placing in its window candles that if one was lit, it was one if by land, two if by sea. And after the church lit the lanterns, Revere rode his horse as fast as he could through the countryside to warn the militia that the British were on their way. As the British reached Concord, the Patriots were able to assemble, numbering around 2,000. And these Patriots used what was at the time an unconventional warfare by hiding behind trees, buildings, fences, and such like that. Now, this action forced the British to retreat. They were not prepared for this. So the big British army has a defeat at Concord by a militia that was able to assemble that defeated the strongest army in the world. And these battles were given a nickname because of that. The shot heard round the world. The next battle that we're going to get into is the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, and that happens in May of 1775. Fort Ticonderoga was an important access point to the Hudson River Valley during the 7 Years' War. It was located in upstate New York, and that also allowed access to Canada, which was very important. On May 10, 1775, Benedict Arnold, Ethan Allen, and the Green Mountain Boys of Vermont joined forces and launched a dawn attack on the fort. The British were not expecting this attack at all. Now, this attack gained Ethan Allen more fame than Benedict Arnold, which would aid in Arnold's eventual defect to the British, making him a traitor. And the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga was a small conflict, but it was very important because it was the first victory of the American forces in the Revolution and the Continental Army. Now, the Continental Army also confiscated cannons from Fort Ticonderoga that were also going to be used in other parts of the war. The next battle we're going to talk about is the Battle of Bunker Hill, and that happened in June of 1775. June 17th, 75, the British troops defeated the American Continental Army in the Battle of Bunker Hill in Massachusetts. Most of the fighting was actually done on Breed's Hill at Bunker's Hill, and it was a little south of Bunker Hill. And the Continental Army and the British forces lost a large percentage of men during the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Continental Army, Colonel Prescott knew his forces did not have enough ammunition supply, so he ordered the infamous "don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes." Now, these redcoats, the British Army, sustained roughly about 2,200 casualties to roughly the 400 Continentals. Now, you would think that that would be a Continental victory, but it was not. The Continental Army was forced to retreat when it ran out of ammunition. Let's now move on to the battles of Trenton and Princeton. These are two very important battles which happened during the winter of 1776 to 1777. Now, the Continental Army was really needing a morale boost, and Washington needed a victory. So now we're talking about General George Washington. General Washington made a surprise attack and crossed the icy Delaware River on the night of Christmas and into the morning of December 26, 1776, leading his Continental Army against a group of Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries, people who were paid to fight. The Hessians were fierce fighters, and they frightened many of the Continentals. So Washington took his 1,400 men across the icy Delaware River and attacked these Hessians when they slept. They were drunk, they were partying, they were having a good time. They weren't worried about anybody fighting on Christmas. Nobody did that. And at this point in time, Washington captures more than 900 mercenaries and occupied Trenton 4 days later. This was a total surprise and boosted the morale of the army. On January 3rd, Washington again led a night attack of Princeton after luring the British forces to the south. And these two victories are important because they raised the morale of the American troops, and it assured that their fight for independence was worthy. Now we're going to get into the Battle of Saratoga in October of 1777. The Battle of Saratoga actually consisted of two major battles that were divided victories between the British and the Continental armies, located outside of Saratoga, New York. The first battle occurred on September 19, 1777, and resulted in a damaging British victory. As the British commander waited for resupplies, the Continental General Horatio Gates received an estimated 12,000 reinforcements. The second major battle of Saratoga was fought on October 7, 1777. General Horatio Gates led the Continental Army into battle and ultimately surrounded the British, forcing them to surrender. Both sides suffered greatly during the battles of Saratoga, and this American victory was important because it was the victory that persuaded the French government to aid the Continental Army in its fight against the British. It is also considered the turning point of the Revolutionary War. So now let's get into something that we call the Winter at Valley Forge, and that's in December of 1777. Continental General George Washington moved his army to their winter quarters at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And even though Washington's forces had been victorious in Saratoga, Washington's men had also fallen victim to a string of defeats that affected their morale. The unofficial capital of the colonies, Philadelphia, fell to the hands of British forces. The British were able to rest indoors, eat plenty of food, sleep in heated houses. When Washington arrived with his 12,000 men in December, they had already been suffering from hunger and disease and fatigue, and now they're going to have to sleep outside in tents in the freezing cold. Their army's supplies were coming non-existent. Basic necessities like food and clothing were in short supply and running out quickly. This frigid cold and disease spread rampant through the camp, causing troop morale to plummet, and the misery of Washington's men is famous. This lack of supplies led to many of Washington's men to be unfit for service. Many men did not have coats, socks, shoes. There are stories of starved, sickly soldiers walking through the snow and leaving bloody footprints behind, that it became the norm. Many of Washington's men resorted to eating their shoes for the leather as well as their horses. It was pure misery. The only thing that kept the men going was knowing that they were fighting for their respected and beloved General George Washington. Now, Washington pleaded to Congress for supplies for his bewildered army. However, this did not change the fact that over 2,000 soldiers died during that infamous winter in Valley Forge of things like starvation, lack of protection from the elements, typhus, and smallpox. The next battle we're going to get into is the Battle of Yorktown, and that was October of 1781. Now, the Battle of Yorktown took place from September 28th until October 19th, 1781. Here, the British, led by General Cornwallis, fought a Continental Army that was led by General George Washington, General Alexander Hamilton, and a French aristocrat turned Continental General, the Marquis de Lafayette. Fought in Yorktown, Virginia, the British were severely outnumbered by the Continental and French armies and navies. Washington was the commander of some 17,000 French and Continental troops, while Cornwallis commanded nearly about 9,000. Washington pushed Cornwallis's back against the Atlantic, where the French Navy was chasing the British Navy out. This left Cornwallis surrounded by the French and American forces. The Continental forces bombarded Yorktown day and night for 3 weeks, moving closer time after time. This wore down the British forces and ultimately led to the surrender ceremony located in a field outside of Yorktown. Cornwallis did not attend this event. He sent an aide to surrender his sword to Washington. And following the war, American leaders like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, John Jay, and others were sent to France to sign the Treaty of Paris in 1783, officially ending the Revolutionary War. So this war, as you could see, came with a lot of wins, but it also came with a whole lot of losses for General Washington. Now, because of Washington's losses, there were lots of times that some other generals were trying to get Washington kicked out of or demoted in the Continental Army. What you have to remember about these battles, a lot of these men who were dying or who didn't flee, these guys were really impressed by George Washington. They really put him on a pedestal, and they would do anything to fight for him. So this is why the Revolution and the Continental Army was able to be successful against the British Crown.